So kia ora and good evening everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. It's hosted by Multiple Sclerosis New Zealand and the New Zealand Multiple Sclerosis Research Trust. I'm Amanda Rose and I'm the National Manager here at MS New Zealand. I just want to take the time to thank you all for joining us to hear more about the work that we've been doing in terms of our advocacy and helping to improve access to treatments and services in New Zealand. It's a significant part of the work that we do at MSNZ, and we're very proud of where we've got to with the report that you're going to hear more about tonight. I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, who you'll hear from later in the course of this evening, Dr. Matthias Grothe, who's hails all the way from northeast Germany, although he's currently enjoying a few months in New Zealand, and it's been an absolute pleasure to connect and work with him over the last couple of months and hear about the groundbreaking work that they are doing in Germany. I also want to welcome Jan Campbell and Neil Woodhams, who will both be providing you with updates on some of the critical work that we've commissioned at MS New Zealand. And the work that we've been doing is to enhance our call to Pharmac and government to change the way in which treatments are valued, as well as Neil will be sharing some exciting updates which has been happening with research out of the Campus Research Centre at the University of Auckland. Jan and Neil are both trustees for the New Zealand MS Research Trust, as well as members of the MSNZ's National Executive Committee. So thank you both for taking the time tonight. We will have time for questions after each speaker tonight. If there are any technical questions which we may need to consult the researchers on, we will endeavour to come back to you following the webinar and put the answers to those questions on our website, along with the recording for tonight's webinar. Please do put any questions that you might have into the chat or the Q&A area, and I'll address these to the speakers following each session. Please note we are unable to answer any questions that might be specific to an individual's health situation. And so without further ado, I will hand over to Jan Campbell to share with you the exciting and groundbreaking Milne report.
Thanks, Amanda. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jan, and I'm actually having a few technical problems, so I'm going to ask Amanda to share my slide deck. So apologies for me having to say next slide. But what I'm going to do tonight is take you through the Milne report, which describes the in-depth research that health economist Richard Milne undertook for us to show the full economic impact of primary progressive MS and why it makes economic sense to factor these costs into the Pharmac funding decisions. So, why did we do this? One of MSNZ's key functions is to advocate for services that improve the lives of people affected by MS. And a major focus for us over the years has been access to appropriate modern medicines funded by Pharmac, so everyone has access to them. This is always a difficult journey, as you can appreciate, and it's often taken many years to get some medicines across the line. And it's been clear to us for a very long time that the Pharmac model does not serve us well. It's many effective medicines languish on their wait lists for many years. And you may hear the term HTA or Health Technology Assessment. You may hear cost utility analysis or cost effectiveness or cost benefit analysis. And all of these terms really describe how an intervention, such as a medicine, is evaluated for funding. So simply put, funders like Pharmac undertake HTAs or cost utility analyses to assess whether a medicine is cost effective or not and worthy of funding. So we believe a major problem is that Pharmac's analysis of the cost of a chronic progressive disease like MS is flawed because it does not take into account indirect costs into their funding assessment. We asked Richard Milne to review Ocrelizumab for primary progressive MS and use this as a case study medicine for this research. So next slide, please, Amanda. So just looking at who undertook the research, as mentioned, Dr. Milne, Richard Milne, who has a PhD in health economics and is a very experienced health economist here in New Zealand with many years' experience and many publications. So we asked them to look at the way that Pharmac undertakes their funding assessment and to compare it with how a medicine might be valued if the full impact of a disease is factored in particular, the indirect costs of having PPMS and the societal costs. Can I please acknowledge the complexity that is health economics? It involves huge sets of data and specialist knowledge to undertake this sort of research. And Dr. Milne sourced information and data from a team of very smart people from both New Zealand and Australia listed here. A little bit of background on ocrelizumab. Some of you may know of ocrelizumab or even be treated with ocrelizumab. It's also called Ocrevus. It was registered in 2017 here in New Zealand by MedSafe for both RMS and PPMS. It was funded for RMS in 2019 because it was considered cost effective compared to other medicines for RMS. However, funding for PPMS was declined at that time and there was no other medicine available for PPMS to compare it with. So ocrelizumab was the first and only medicine to show a slowing in progression for those with PPMS. And I think that's important to realise because when it wasn't funded by Pharmac, there was no other alternative. When we initiated this research, well over a year ago, it still wasn't funded. And we felt strongly that it should be made available for those with PPMS in New Zealand, just as it has been in other parts of the world. I'm happy to say that in the interim, ocrelizumab was funded for PPMS late last year. That was 6 years after MedSafe approval. The findings from this review still remain extremely important for future funding decisions for other medicines and reflect what a number of other OECD countries factor in when looking at medicine funding. So it's not just about ocrelizumab, it's just using that medicine and PPMS as a case study to show actually the funding mechanism. So, slide 5. Just looking at the current Pharmac funding model, primarily Pharmac looks at the cost of buying and administering the medicine. They look at the cost effectiveness compared with other treatments. They look at the potential cost savings or impacts on the healthcare system. They look at the potential impact on patients' lives, of course. And they look at the annual cost impact on a capped medicine budget. So very much focused on the health system impacts. Next slide, Amanda. So a cost benefit model, it's widely used overseas and is recommended in actual fact by the New Zealand Treasury for all budget initiatives, would look more broadly at societal costs. So this is what we asked Dr. Milne to look at. And in a chronic progressive diseases like MS, it's sensible to take in all of these costs. So the model considers cost of treatment, the financial impact to the whole of society, the improvement in quality of life for people with PPMS. It also looked at all those indirect costs as listed on this slide, and you can appreciate that there's quite a lot of costs associated with a chronic progressive disease that can cause disability. Dr. Milne then compared the cost effectiveness of ocrelizumab using this holistic model, what we call the Milne model, with the current Pharmac model. As we know, the total impact of a chronic disease can be far greater than the impact on the health system alone, and this is what the Milne model reflects. So the findings. When these indirect factors are considered, the cost of ocrelizumab at almost 5 times the cost generated from the Pharmac model would still be considered cost effective. So in other words, even if we paid a lot more per person per year for ocrelizumab and PPMS, it would still be a cost saving to New Zealanders because indirect societal costs account for over half the cost of PPMS annually. Simply put, Pharmac's funding model greatly underestimates the savings to society that can be made by investing in life-saving medicines and life-improving medicines. So this is just another way of looking at it. If Pharmac were prepared to invest in the full value of a medicine, the chances are we'd have earlier funding, because Pharmac wouldn't have to wait for competition or generics to enter the market to get a cheaper medicine. If you have earlier funding, you have more people access it earlier, and this should slow progression, certainly slow disability, and this, of course, has a major impact on people's lives. But in terms of the economic model, and I'm sorry to focus fully on money here, but this is we are talking about a funding mechanism. This really does result in lower costs to New Zealand overall. So we're not alone in looking at this. Some of you may have heard of MS Brain Health, Time Matters. It's a policy document that's been put out by the Oxford Health Policy Forum, a group of expert MS specialists from around the world, actually, led by Dr. Gavin Giovannoni in the UK. And it's a very highly considered policy report that certainly is a beacon for gold standard care for people with MS. And in this report, they also state that carrying out a health economic assessment looking at the full direct and indirect costs of MS should be driving funding decisions. And if you look at this a little bit complex diagram there, the red boxes are what Pharmac now would consider, but we're asking that the orange boxes and the green boxes are also considered the full societal costs. The blue boxes in this diagram, much more difficult to incorporate into a HTA because they aren't quantitative, much harder to measure, but that is obviously the vision and the long-term goal. So what's next? Well, actually, we released this report, or a lay version of it, on October the 15th, and it was picked up by TVNZ, Radio New Zealand, and my local paper, the ODT, and actually got a lot of coverage, which is fantastic. It's been sent to David Seymour, who's the Associate Minister of Health and Minister for Pharmac, and it has been sent to Paula Bennett, who is the Chair of Pharmac. We've had an invitation to meet with the ACT Party health spokesperson, and Dr. Milne is in discussions with Pharmac and the Ministry of Health. A paper has been submitted, the research paper, for publication in a journal called Pharmacoeconomics. And also you can access the report and actually eventually this presentation on our website at MSNZ, and the link is there. So in conclusion, really, brain health, time matters is what this is all about. It's about getting medicines to people as quickly as we can. And to do this, we believe we need to look at a more holistic approach to address the funding process here in New Zealand, so that people with MS can live their best lives. So thank you. That was a very quick overview of this research, and I hope it made sense.
Thank you very much, Jan. Hopefully that was a good summary for people. As Jan said, it's a very technical piece of work that we ourselves have struggled with. So we even had to contract a translator to help us understand the technical information, who did a fantastic job at that. So thank you to Kerry Walker for it. Also thank you to Dr. Milne and the team for the incredible amount of work that they put into this report. As Jan said, we commissioned this in January 2023. You know, hoping that it would take us 6 months, and I think 18 months later, you know, we were almost there. So just the amount of data and depth of analysis and retesting of the model that Dr. Milne and the team did was an incredible piece of work. It's also been picked up by other health organisations as well at the moment, and which is really fantastic to see. I believe we have a couple of questions that's come through in the chat. Does ocrelizumab have any place for treating secondary progressive MS? Unfortunately, the research around that isn't strong in treating secondary progressive MS, and that's why there hasn't been any progress in that space. We do recommend looking at the recent webinar that we did with Helmut Butzkoven, and he talks about some of the research that is going into progressive MS. So we can certainly add a link when we send this out to that other webinar, so you can learn a little bit more about what is on the horizon there. Another question, cladribine is a medication that could save a lot in the long term if it is as effective as it seems to be. Yep, we agree with you on that one. It's another treatment that we are strongly advocating for, and you know, we think ourselves that it'd be interesting to put it through this model to see how it would cost, because the issue is that it's how it needs to be cost neutral, and the long-term benefits of that cost because of the mechanism and mode of action of the treatment. Are there any other questions? You will be able to ask further questions at the end of the session. But if not, we will move on to Neil Woodhams. Neil, are you able to join us? Thank you very much. Neil is going to be talking about some exciting research that fills quite a void for us in terms of data and knowledge that we were really excited to be approached about by Natalia Bovin at the Campus Research Centre at the University of Auckland. So Neil, please take it away when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm just getting it up.
There it is.
Sorry, that's not what I want. Right. So welcome to my session of the presentation tonight. The real importance of this is that at the very heart of everything we do is we need to know at a national level how many people have MS, and at a local level for the delivery of services, it's also important. And in my experience, every time you sit down with a politician, the first question they ask is how many people have got MS. In 2006, with a great deal of cooperation from all the neurology departments up and down the country, we were able to fund a very comprehensive prevalence study, internationally recognised as one of the best prevalence studies that has been done. And as a result, there were 2,917 people identified with a diagnosis of MS. And following that study, there was a whole lot of additional research done. In 2012, 2014, MS New Zealand funded the MS Incidence Study out of Canterbury, and that identified 134 newly diagnosed people per annum over each of those years, and a further 90 with clinically isolated syndrome, which in many instances leads on to a diagnosis of MS. And then with some work that we did with the Institute of Economic Research in 2021, they converted those bits of information using the mortality data as well to estimate that there's 4,130 people in New Zealand with MS. From our point of view, as trustees of the Research Trust from 2015, we've had on our agenda an additional prevalence study, but earlier this year we had a quote from the people that did the 2006 study, and that quote was it would cost now in excess of $3 million. So we've been looking around for other ways of solving this problem of keeping up to date with how many people in New Zealand have MS. And this led to Natalia Boven's work that we became aware of earlier this year. And Natalia, I see, is on the webinar tonight. So welcome, Natalia, and thanks for all the work that you've done in this work. Now, I want to emphasise that at this stage it is work in progress, but we believe that the basic approach that she's taken is valid. And we intend to work with Compass in the next year to further refine the information that we've got. So regard this presentation tonight as presentation of work in progress. And Natalia used the integrated data infrastructure, and you might say, what is that? And we'll describe in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But basically, the Census Department, the Department of Statistics, manages a major database which incorporates databases from a number of different sources. And researchers with ethical approval are able to use that data to do research such as this. And so Natalia set out to see whether she could use the IDI to identify people with MS and to identify any social or ethnic inequalities to access funding for disease-modifying treatments. And the information that she used out of the IDI were public and private hospital discharge records, so that if you are admitted to hospital for either a day case, a day stay procedure, or an overnight procedure, when you are discharged, that record is coded into a database. And if you have MS, if you're been admitted to hospital for MS or any other purpose where MS is noted as a comorbidity, that will show up in those records, and through the IDI you can identify it. Prescription data through Pharmac, the census and death records, Socrates, which is the National Needs Assessment Service Coordination, the NASCs data that support disability funding, and the Inter-Ray Needs Assessment, which is the MSD for disability support information. It's important to note that this information isn't necessarily comprehensive. It may have identified people who don't have a confirmed MS diagnosis, and it may identify people whose diagnosis was identified with MS but has subsequently changed, and there will be missing persons in the information. Whenever the IDI data is used, the Department of Stats require us to issue this disclaimer, and it makes it clear. I'm not going to read it out in detail. You can see it there on the screen, but it makes it clear that the results of this work are the work of the author and not Stats New Zealand or individual data suppliers. They're therefore not official statistics, but they've been created for research purposes. And where tax data has been used from the Inland Revenue Department, then it's for statistical purposes only. So looking at the key findings of this report, it looked at all people with service use suggestive of MS at any point, and those resident as at June 2022. And you'll see there, the blue line is the number of new diagnoses over those years, and the red line, the number of deaths. The total cohort, in other words, the total number of people identified through this process was 7,890. And of those, 4,860 were resident in New Zealand in June 2022. And the difference being, firstly, obviously people who have died over that period and some people who will have gone overseas. The increase of 1943 since 2006, which is the prevalence data, is a 66% increase, which is a very significant increase. But in Australia, we know that it increased between 30% between 2017 and 2021, and by 57% since 2010. So clearly the incidence of MS is in fact increasing. And that is supported by information we've had from our regional offices and from neurology departments up and down the country. So if you look, this chart sets out where the 7,890 people were identified. There were 6,897 identified through public hospitalisations. There were 173 through private hospital data, 1965 through Socrates, which is the NASC database, 918 through the MSD, and 2,616 through Pharmac information. Now, when you look at those figures, you say, well, they add up to far more than 790. But obviously, people will be identified in 2 or more of these various areas as part of it. And part of the work that Natalia's done has been to identify those and remove them to get that total. Sorry, I've just lost my PowerPoint. Sorry, people, now there we are, back again. So the figure down the bottom, once again, is those how we reach the 4,860 that are resident as at the 30th of June 2022. I stress that there may be people who have not been identified with a confirmed diagnosis. There'll be people in there whose diagnosis has changed, but there'll also be people who've been missed out completely. Natalia's been able to do some work around both the gender of those people and where they live, and the graph that you can see there, or sorry, the map of New Zealand just confirms what we've known all along, that if you live in the south of the South Island, you're much more likely. The prevalence of MS, according to this data, is between 200 and 225 per 100,000 people in Southland, compared with 50 to 75 if you live in Northland. And the women continue to be 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with MS than men. So there's nothing in there that's new, but it just confirms what we've known all along. And then we have some new information around ethnicity, which is something that we haven't had in great detail before. And of particular interest to us is, in fact, the number of Maori showing up with MS, where it would be fairly generally accepted within the MS community that Maori don't get MS. And we believe that this, in some instances, leads to Maori being seen by the medical profession with symptoms of MS, but it's discounted because they're Maori. And this is an area that we obviously want to do a lot more. You'll see there that there's not a lot of Pacific people with MS. The number of Asian people is growing, and MELAA is a new acronym for all of us, but it's Middle East, Latin America, and Africa. And so those numbers are showing up as well. But by far the greatest number of people with MS continues to be European. This is a graph that shows when the first record of service use that was suggested of MS, so that when in the IDI were people first identified in terms of their age within the IDI. And you'll see the mean age, the average age of first record is mostly in the 40s. The only exception actually is 37. Now, that's of concern to us because we believe that first symptoms are often very much earlier than an average age of 40. And you'll see in the graphs, there is some quite significant difference in ages. Now, once again, with the Pacific and the Asian figures, they're very, very small numbers, so that may influence it. But you'll see here, large number of people in the European band that are being diagnosed at 50 plus, and that certainly is a worry for us. Natalia then looked at treatment inequities, and these are the disease-modifying drugs that she looked at, and she graded them into three cohorts, I suppose. One that are regarded as being low to moderately effective, fingolimod, which was rated as intermediate, and then the two highly effective ones, Tisabri or natalizumab and ocrelizumab. And this demonstrates that Maori, Pacifica and other ethnic minorities were noted as being less likely to access the highly effective disease-modifying therapies. And this, of course, could result in worsened long-term effects. So you'll see that the sample size for Pacific ethnic groups was too small to run the first analysis. These are separate models, and so the risk relates to the specific ethnic groups, and you can't compare between. The other measure of treatment inequalities was the socio-economic status of people, and it was found that, for example, if you had a university level education, you had 1.7 times greater the odds of getting a highly efficient DMT than if you didn't have a university education. And if you had a high socio-economic position and employment, you are 1.7 times likely to get access. And in the bottom here, the deprivation quintiles, Q5 are people living in the most deprived area, a much lower likelihood if you live in a poor area of getting access to the highly effective disease-modifying treatments. So, as I stressed before, this is very much work in progress, but we wanted to, report where we've got to. And so why is this research important? We don't have an updated prevalence study, and we don't have a MS patient register effective in New Zealand. And the epidemiological data is really the cornerstone of public health and public health planning, and it shapes policy decisions and enables adequate resources to be allocated and informs evidence-based practice. MS New Zealand has always carried out its advocacy based on evidence. We've avoided getting involved in emotion as far as we possibly can. And so having the evidence from a study like this is really important for us from an advocacy point of view. We also hope that in the future we'll be able to break this down into a regional level so that our regional societies will have an accurate count of people with MS in their areas. But a 67% increase in the number of people with MS in 16 years is very worrying, but it's a fact that we can't shirk from. And we know that already hospital services, neurology services for MS are under significant stress. And there's little evidence to believe that this rate of increase won't continue. So we're from here. We're talking with Natalia and the Campus Research Centre to extract further demographic and geographic information. From a point of view of advocacy, time matters in MS, and this information will hopefully add to the melting pot of planning for adequate clinical resourcing and to reduce delays in diagnosis and treatment, and to address barriers of access, with us continuing to advocate strongly for more accessible treatments. So it's an important piece of the puzzle, and we're very grateful to Campus for undertaking this work. How you people can help? We're always interested at MSNZ of barriers to access, and so reporting through your community advisors on barriers to access. We haven't talked very much about MS Base, but MS Base is a international MS registry out of Melbourne, and the MS Research Trust is funding Waikato, Te Whatuora Waikato, to install MS Base there, and it's operating very successfully. And we're keen that it should be picked up by other neurology departments up and down the country. Christchurch uses it and is just in the process of joining the MS Base registry. You can stay connected through your regional society and stay abreast with our activities through signing up for MS Voice, where we provide monthly updates on our work. And finally, a plea for funding. If you please consider supporting MSNZ for our advocacy work or the Research Trust to fund ongoing research. And the details of how to contact us are there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. We're very grateful to Natalia for taking on this piece of work. It was a pleasure and surprise to hear from her and that she'd taken an interest in MS to do this work, and we're looking forward to working with her to see what else we can extract and to fill the void, as Neil says, of not having a prevalence study. This kind of relates to a question that's come through, Neil. Can you elaborate on why the cost of research is so high? $3 million is a lot.
No, I don't. I mean, it was a quote from the Tasmanian University that did the original one. It did involve an enormous amount of work. Some of you may or may not have been around when it happened, but the neurologists in New Zealand set out to reassess every person they'd ever seen where they had diagnosed with MS, and it involved an enormous amount of work. And one of the reasons why, even if we had 3 million, we probably wouldn't be able to do it today is that I just don't think that the neurology departments have the capacity to repeat the level of detail. I mean, there was a questionnaire that went out that was, I think, something like 14 or 15 pages long, that every person that had been diagnosed with MS was asked to fill in, and our community advisors would take them out and sit down with people and help fill them in. It was a very, very large piece of work.
A comment which I think is a very important comment, even from someone, even being able to be diagnosed, I would think would be more difficult for lower socioeconomic groups. I feel being able to afford things made my diagnosis far faster to attain. Did you have a comment that you wanted to add to that? I think it's something that we certainly agree with at MSNZ, but obviously we want to ensure there's equity of access across the country and irrespective of socioeconomic barriers.
Yes, I mean, it's an unfortunate fact of life that people with resources are often able to, go privately, for example, or whatever. But why people are not, in a lower socioeconomic group, are not being given the opportunity for DMTs is something that we probably need to do some more work on and actually work out what the barriers are.
And another comment, this is an excellent piece of work and presentation, thank you. Is there any data on the split of relapsing remitting PPMS and SPMS?
No.
There isn't. And we have looked at this for kind of the next stage of the piece of work, but unfortunately the best kind of guess we could get from it is through the prescription data, which would obviously show us the relapsing remitting. But that would be the only level at which we could do that. We can't really split out the remainder of the data. Another question, Neil, do you think that actual incidence is increasing, or do you think it's related to better diagnoses, e.g. access to MRI awareness by GPs?
I think it's all of those things. And one of the things is, of course, is that access to effective disease-modifying drugs means that people with MS are living longer, so that the population is increasing through that as well. But there's no doubt from the international research that I've seen is that the incidence is also increasing because of lifestyle and other factors. So it's all of those things that are causing the increase.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome Dr. Matthias Grothe to come and speak to everyone now. Matthias, would you like to join us? Matthias is a German, we've just got one question come through. We just asked this quick. A barrier to diagnosis would also be the cost of time of work to get to appointments in public system, and also the cost of transport, parking, etc. Inequity everywhere. I spent hours of my life waiting to be seen to get a diagnosis. We completely hear you on this, and this is an issue that we've been raising as well ourselves with Pharmac earlier this year, and trying to get access to a range of treatments which would actually reduce these barriers. They're much more accessible treatments which also don't require long infusion times in hospital. So we're acutely aware of this and would really like to see how we can further reduce those barriers. Matthias, thank you for joining us. Matthias is a German neurologist and he specialises in the treatment of MS patients. He actually covers a very large rural area in northeastern Germany and has 1,000 MS patients a year. There's approximately around 1,000 MS patients in Auckland, so he covers this just in his area as well. His research focuses have been within other neurological conditions as well, and looking at treatment approaches using neuropsychological and brain therapy. Primarily, it uses non-invasive brain stimulation techniques, and he's looking at how this also can be implemented with MS, as well as he's very involved and interested in how to improve education and reduce barriers and inequity of access for patients, particularly through his work with his rural community. So Matthias, thank you for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. I hope you can see my slides. And yeah, thank you for the invitation and the honor of talk to you a little bit about something I'm really interested in, and it's also an honor to speak after these two very, very important topics. And I don't know why the size of the picture of me is larger compared to the other ones, because, well, the other two topics are very important, and it's been an honor for me. So at first, I want to be able to, yes. So the title of my talk is The Hidden Symptoms in MS. And it's about cognition, depression, and fatigue. It's something like a hobby of me since many, many years. And I just want to give you a short overview about what we know, and maybe the most important part is what can we do for several treatment approaches. But I just want to introduce myself a little bit because, I'm a German neurologist living on the other side of the world. And I don't know if you have ever heard about Greifswald. I don't think so, because it's a very, very small university city in Germany. And so here you can see a map of Europe, and the United Kingdom, and maybe Germany, and I'm living here, and it's very, very red dot here. And Greifswald is the smallest university city in Germany, but it's beautiful, as you can see. So it's about 60,000 people living there. It's a very old city, one of the oldest universities in Germany, and also in Europe. You can compare it. It's like the university is as old as Rangitoto, so more than 500 years old. And we also have some water there. It's at the Baltic Sea. We don't have a tide, so it's more like a lake, but it's really, really beautiful. And we also have this kind of MS center. I'm this kind of head of the MS center, and we have a very large catchment area of about, let's say more than 100 kilometers in each direction. And this is the whole area. It's called Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, and it's just a kind of advertisement. And it's just America has Florida, Austria has the Alps, and Germany has Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. So it's a very beautiful part of the country. But it's very rural. It has a population density about 70 living people in the per square kilometer, which is, to be honest, more compared to New Zealand, because here in New Zealand it's about 20, the population density. But in this very large area, there are living 1.6 million people. And if you bring it down to the MS patients, you might know that the prevalence of MS in Germany is much higher compared to New Zealand. We have a prevalence about 2 till 3 per 1,000 people living there, which means that in this whole area here, this whole Mecklenburg-Vorpommern area, they're living between 3,000 and 5,000 persons with MS. And this pretty interesting work has been done a few years ago from colleagues in Düsseldorf, and they just wanted to tell the community how long it takes. They just took Google Maps and just had a look how long it takes to arrive in an MS Care network within 60 minutes per drive. And as you can see here, Greifswald is somewhere there. That's Berlin. You might know this. And there's an area in between where it's not so many people living there, but it's also very very difficult for the MS patients to reach a real MS specialist there. Just that you can kind of compare the sizes between the countries. This is the map of New Zealand on the map of Germany. And if we might just think about Berlin would be Wellington, would mean that Wanganui is Greifswald. So these are the size of the country, and you can say that between Berlin and Greifswald there's no real opportunity for the patients to see MS neurologists. As you can see here on the left side, it's this MS regional contact points, and on the right side, it's something called MS specialists in Germany. And as you can see, the red dots, these are the specialists that are treating more than 400 MS patients per year. The blue dots are the MS specialist rehab clinics, and the green dots are the kind of neurologists treating more than 80 MS patients per year. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of these kind of specialists, neurologists, mainly because we do have really a lot of MS patients in Germany, about 200 to 300,000 MS patients in Germany. And the other very important topic is that each of these sites are taking part in the MS registry. We've heard about this. We've heard about MS base. In Germany, there's no MS base. We do have an own German MS registry, which is pretty nice. And as you can see here, a lot of neurologists are taking part in it. And so we are able to make really important research about symptoms, about treatments, about whatever you want. And just as an example, it's a study on Germany about this MS registry, and you can see we have the data of 40,000 MS patients. And the topic about this article was, well, what's this kind of hidden symptoms, fatigue, depression, and cognition? As you can see here, it's just about the prevalence. It's just about how many patients do have what we call fatigue, what we call depression, and what we call cognitive impairments. And as you can see here, their frequency is very high. The frequency of fatigue, you can say between 60 and 80% of the patients do have this kind of fatigue. And for cognition, you can say that, well, let's say between 40 and 50% of the patients do have cognitive impairments. So these are very, very important symptoms, and they are not hidden. In my opinion, these are the most important symptoms, because they do have a really big impact on the daily life. And well, it's just another example. That's not the German data. It's a European data set. It was a European survey. And here you have the data on 60,000 patients. It was an online survey, just telling the same. It's about the discrimination, about the impairments based on the EDSS. But as you can see here, the fatigue and the cognition are really prevalent and are really severe, and they do have a really high impact on the daily life. One thing we always have to keep in mind when we are talking about depression, cognition, and fatigue, and that's they are at least in part interacting with each other. So as you can imagine, if a patient has this kind of fatigue, if he or she is feeling exhausted, well, you can imagine that the mood is not at its best. And the same for cognition. If I'm really exhausted, I'm not able to have the high cognitive ability as I'm maybe used to. And it's the other way around. If your mood is very low, you feel a little bit tired, you feel exhausted, you're feeling fatigued, and it's always have the same impact on cognition. So we have to keep in mind that that it's not so simple to really discriminate between these kind of symptoms. It's more or less interacting to each other. If you have a depression, you might also have a very high risk of fatigue. And that's one of my favorite figures in this field. on an article made by Iris Penner. And as you can see here, it's interacting and it has really high impact on the quality of life and on the vocational status. And each kind of stress which occurs on each dimension will lead to a higher rate of cognitive deficits, to a higher rate of depression and fatigue. So it's really important to keep all these symptoms in mind. So let's have a look at each domain. So cognition in MS, what does it mean? So as you might know, cognition means everything. So you can you have to be cognitive aware all the day through. You have to keep in mind the names of your kids, the way to your fridge, I don't know. So each of this is cognition, and at least theoretically you can discriminate between different cognitive domains. And this is a very old study, but it's very important that you can see, well, you can say that each domain can be impaired. So MS can lead to, let's say, any kind of cognitive impairment. But as you all also can see here, there are cognitive domains that are, well, more prevalent impaired. And one of the most important domain is this kind of what is called processing speed. So let's say the speed of thinking. So if you have to give an answer, you have to think about, and it takes quite a lot of time. And what we know is that if you have an MS, this kind of speed, this kind of cognitive speed, that's one of the main topic, the main domain which is impaired in MS. But as you can see here, it's not the only domain. And what we also know is that if you have a progressive MS, the impairment rates are much higher. So here you can see that let's say 70-80% of the progressive patients do have a kind of cognitive impairment compared to a lower rate in relapsing remitting. That's what we know, but something pretty new and which is, in my opinion, really, really important. It can also occur during a relapse. Okay, so it's a kind of debate for years if it's possible to have an isolated cognitive relapse. And I strongly believe in this concept. The problem is, well, if you're feeling a little bit, well, cognitive impaired, whatever that means, you can't go to your neurologist and say, well, I think I am not able to calculate in the way I used to be. But at least theoretically, it can be. And what we know is that you can have cognitive impairments on each kind of relapse. So we know that if you have a relapse leading to a sensory loss, whatever, that also can have impact on your cognitive ability. And as you can see here, that's just a kind of figure showing that's the cognitive status, that's the relapse. And you can see here the cognitive ability is decreasing, but it's afterward increasing, but it's not the same level. So we do know that a relapse can lead to cognitive impairments. And at least in part, if you're treating the relapse early enough and good enough, that can also help increasing your cognitive abilities.
Matthias,
yeah.
sorry, can I just interrupt? Could you just check that your sound is off mute? Just a couple of, someone's just said that they can't quite hear,
Okay.
and because the symbol still shows mute. Most of us can hear, I think.
Okay. I hope I can make the microphone a little bit louder. Okay, so hopefully most of you can understand me. Okay, so maybe I will talk a little bit slower.
It's all fixed now, thank you.
Okay, so about the next domain, it's about depression. As all of you might know, MS can lead to a depression, which is called a kind of secondary depression. So if you have any kind of of hint on your daily life. Everything can lead to a secondary depression, but we also know that patients do have a higher risk in getting a depression before they even have a kind of MS. So that's pretty old knowledge about the interaction of depression and MS. And as you can see here, it's just an example what we think, what we believe might lead to this kind of depression. So a lot of structural damage within the brain can lead to this kind of depression. The main topic, the most important topic, in my opinion, is it's not only depression. We know that any kind of psychiatric comorbidity is much more higher in MS patients compared to healthy controls. Okay, so with MS, you have a higher risk of getting a depression, you have a higher risk to have a kind of anxiety disorder, but also bipolar syndromes, schizophrenic syndromes, or obsessive compulsive syndromes. These are only that ones we really good know about. But at least theoretically, it makes sense, because this kind of disease, well, it destroys brain networks. So why should this kind of disease only lead to motor impairment or sensory impairment? It can also lead to neuropsychological or even psychiatric comorbidity. We have to keep in mind that, and because as neurologists, for example, for me in my home university, it's always important just to have a good contact with the psychiatric colleagues, because it can always be that an MS patient will have a new anxiety disorder, and we have to keep in mind that, and it's based on the MS and nothing else. The third and maybe the most complex issue is fatigue, whatever that means. So what I'm showing you here is just an old kind of concept how we can understand fatigue. It's very difficult. It's not necessary to understand it. And what we are trying to do is just to at the very first level to divide between fatigue and what is called fatigability, because fatigue is something we subjectively say, okay, I'm feeling a little bit exhausted. I'm so tired. I don't know why, but this kind of subjective feeling of exhaustion. But on the other hand, this is kind of what we call fatigability. And fatigability is something we are able to measure. So you can have motor fatigability, so this kind of decrease in motor speed, or you also can have a kind of cognitive fatigability. So all these kind of things we are calling fatigue, but we don't even know good what it's about and how to treat it. And this kind of schemes can be more and more complicated. That's really a really big problem. And at the moment, I'm writing on a review article about fatigue in general in health and disease, because, to be honest, we know a lot about fatigue in MS, but fatigue is not something unique for MS. We do know that fatigue can occur, as you might know, after COVID. Fatigue is a big problem in rheumatic diseases, in infectious diseases. So kind of fatigue, whatever it is, there's something comparable between different diseases. And we are thinking about, there might be genetic factors, there might also be immunological factors, but also structural factors in the meaning of brain structural alterations, but also behavioral factors. So quite a lot of things that are leading to fatigue, but can also, well, help understanding it and help for the treatment of fatigue. I will come on that later on. Because if we want to understand this kind of neuropsychological impairment and we want to treat it, we have to diagnose it. And what I'm just showing you here is something which is recommended, and at least in part, we in Germany are doing it. What I'm showing you here are a few surveys. So as you can see on the left side is kind of back depression inventory. It's a survey, and in my home university, we are doing these kind of measurements once a year. So each patient will have to fill out the back depression inventory, showing about, asking about mood, about depressive mood, and something about anxiety. And the same patients have to fill out this, what is called FSMC, which is a questionnaire about fatigue, the fatigue scale for motor and cognitive function. And each patient has also do this kind of neuropsychological test, which takes, let's say 2 minutes. And what you have to do is this kind of, which is called SDMT. It's a processing speed task. You see this kind of legend, and you just have to fill out the line here with the symbols here. So you have to say, okay, it's the 8, it's the 3, it's the 4, it's the 8. So you just have kind of measurement about processing speed. And so each patient does all of this once a year, which takes about 20 minutes. And it just gives us a kind of information about this kind of neuropsychological impairments. And well, you can ask why it's important. It's just about what we can do. And now we are coming to this therapeutic approaches. This slide is showing you the therapeutic approaches where we do have a lot of evidence. So it's rather simple. For example, for depression, we know that a pharmacological therapy can help making the depression better. So in the treatment of depression, antidepressive medication, which is pretty common, but you have to make the diagnostics before you can really be able to treat it. And the other thing is this kind of psychotherapy, which, well, I don't know the way it is here in New Zealand, but in Germany it's very difficult to find a psychologist really specialized in MS patients. So as far as I know, in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, in the whole area, there are 3 neuropsychologists that are able to really specialized in MS. I guess it's quite comparable to New Zealand. So that's really difficult. But that's what we do know. And it's the same for cognition. What we know is that this kind of memory rehabilitation, and well, you can make it even simpler. You can just say you have to train your cognition. We do know that regular rehabilitation once a year, once per 2 years, can help as a kind of treatment approach for cognitive impairments in MS. And to make it more easier, you can do it at home. It's just about training your brain. It's just about train your cognitive abilities. You have to train your brain. And for the fatigue level, as you can see here, there is good evidence about exercise therapy. So it's, again, doing sports, just being active can also help for the treatment of fatigue. And something which is called cognitive behavior therapy. It's something you can say in between of a psychotherapy and an educational approach. So it's something that psychologists can do, and it's just learning about what you can do for your own, just as a treatment approach. And we do have kind of mixed results on pharmacological therapy. There's no drug approved and covered for this kind of symptom in MS. In Germany, it's possible to prescribe off-label something which is called amantadine, which costs in Germany about, let's say, it's about 20 New Zealand dollars. So it's not so expensive. And there are quite a few patients telling me that it really helps. It's just a pill. You can take it twice or 3 times a day. You have to keep in mind taking it not later than let's say 5 p.m. because it can lead to kind of awakening in the during the night. But there are a few patients telling us that it's really helpful. That's what we know, and that's what we do have good evidence for. And what I'm interested in is what is called non-invasive brain stimulation. So what does it mean? So there are a few different kind of non-invasive brain stimulation methods. What you can see here, it's called TDCS. You can just compare it a little bit, just putting a battery on your head. So there's a kind of current flow, and what we've done in Germany, and we just submitted the paper, was one of the very first studies using this TDCS for an improvement in the SDMT test. So this is a picture of a patient, and he's doing this SDMT task. During this task, his brain, these parts of the brain are stimulated with this device. And this leads to an improvement in the SDMT, which is pretty cool. And we are thinking about adopting this kind of measure because it's also possible to have this kind of TDCS as a home-based setting, so the patient can take it at home and use it at home just as a kind of improvement for the cognitive abilities. What you can see here, this is a coil. The person here, that's me, and this is what is called TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and you can use TMS as a treatment, which is called RTMS, so repetitive TMS, and it's approved, and in Germany it's covered. The costs are covered as a treatment approach for depression, not depression in MS, so depression in general. And what we are doing in Greifswald is we are treating the depressive patients with this approach, hopefully getting some evidence that it's possible, and I believe that it's possible to even treat depression in MS patients with this approach. And we are also doing this kind of RTMS. We are doing a trial in fatigue, and as you can see here, that this is a very new method, which is called vagus nerve stimulation. It's something you have to put in your ear, and until now there's no study using this method in MS patients. Well, we've already begun a study about cognition and fatigue in MS. So I really believe in these kind of therapeutic approaches, because it's, as it says, it's non-invasive, and what we are doing is just we are stimulating parts of the brain that might not function in a way it should be, and it's just a kind of what we are calling neuroplasticity. And I strongly believe that in the next years we will hear about that, and hopefully I can help to strengthen the evidence on this approach for the MS patients. To make it a little bit more complicated, this therapeutic approaches, it's the same slide as before. You see here for depression, we know that psychotherapy is working. We know that pharmacological therapy is working. And in my opinion, this non-invasive brain stimulation will also work. But there are, of course, more therapeutic approaches that can be done. And one aspect that it's really important to know is we have to treat not only the MS. What we know is that an MS patient that has also hypertension, has also diabetes, these kind of comorbidities have an impact on the MS itself, especially on this kind of neuropsychological impairments. So treating the so-called hidden symptoms is not only about treating the MS, it's not only about treating the depression itself, it's also about treating the comorbidities. And that's something we really have to keep in mind. The GPs have to keep in mind that, and we as neurologists also have to keep in mind that. And the next is about nutrition. Well, I believe that nutrition is important and nutrition might help. Nutrition can help as a treatment for neuropsychological impairments. What you can see here is one of the very, very few studies on that. It's a kind of overview, and you can see here this blue dot is what we know about nutrition studies for fatigue. And as you can see here, there are 2 studies on thiamine. There's 1 study on vitamin D showing a kind of evidence that nutrition can lead to a better fatigue. In my opinion, one of the main problems is to get this kind of evidence, because as you might know, for therapeutic approaches, it's always best to have this kind of what is called double-blind randomized controlled trial. So double-blind means neither the doctor or the patient knows what the therapeutic approach is. Randomized controlled is that you can, well, if you're comparing one against the other, it has to be randomized. So if we are just thinking about making a study comparing eating chocolate all the day compared to eating meat all the day, would means that neither the doctor nor the patient knows if they are eating chocolate or meat, which is, let's say, not really possible. So that's the main problem about each kind of lifestyle approach to getting this kind of evidence, because at least theoretically, it's always needed to have this kind of randomized controlled trial so that the health insurers will cover the costs. But for this, for these kind of lifestyle approaches, it's impossible to have this kind of evidence, because it's impossible to make this kind of evidence-based medicine. But okay, that's just my personal opinion. The last thing you can see here is about education. And well, what I'm doing at the moment is trying to educate you, trying to explain what are these symptoms about, what can you do, how can it be measured. All of these topics are more or less education, and it's always necessary that the patients know about their symptoms, know about their disease, and in my opinion, that's a really, really important therapeutic approach. Education in rural areas makes it a little bit more complicated. So what I'm showing you here is, I don't know if you know Adobe Firefly. Adobe Firefly is an AI approach for graphics. You can ask the software, please make a picture about whatever, and that's what I did. I did tell the Adobe Firefly, please make a picture about digital education programs in rural areas like New Zealand or Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, and that's what the software did. I don't know if it's more New Zealand or Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, but just as an example, what digital approaches are able to do. And in my opinion, we have to go this way. We have to use digital solutions, especially in this kind of rural areas where it's still, well, it's impossible to have a high density of neurologists, of psychiatrists, of psychologists, of medical staff that can help in the treatment or in the diagnostics. A lot of things have to be done in a modern way. And as my last slide, it's just an example. Back in Greifswald, I'm a little bit interested in doing chatbots, and that's what I just asked the chatbot. Well, if I have depression and an MS, what can I do? And that's what the chatbot told me. And again, it's just an example, and it's more or less that what I told you before. It's about exercise. It's about maybe nutrition. It's about medication. So this information was not given by a doctor. This information was given by a software, given by a chatbot, and that's what is really important, in my opinion, just to educate the patients, sometimes also educate the doctors as well, but to get a very high level of knowledge about the symptoms, because that really helps in the treatment. So thank you very much. And as you might know, I've just a little bit changed the title, because in my opinion, it's not the hidden symptoms in MS, it's about the very evident symptoms in MS. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I think that was really interesting to, as you say, they're not hidden, they are very evident, and they do impact people significantly, as we know through the work that we do and talking with people, and hopefully it's resonated around that education, the managing the comorbidities and the nutrition. These are certainly areas that we are interested in pushing, and how patients can be really proactive in helping to manage their own condition alongside the other kind of pharmacological and clinical practice. Are there any specific, there's one or two questions. You started quite an interesting chat around amantadine, which got some people interested, talking to their clinicians when they next have meetings. One person has said, seems like the cognitive aspect of functional composite test, seems like the cognitive aspect of functional composite test, I personally prefer that to the EDSS test. Do you use in Germany EDSS monitoring as well alongside this?
Yeah, of course. It's always very important and necessary to do this kind of EDSS assessment. But the EDSS has the main problem, and that's because, well, between an EDSS between 4 and 10, it's only about gait. So with an EDSS of 4, you know that it's a patient with an impaired gait ability. With an EDSS of 6, you have help in the gait. From the methodological point of view, if you have a measurement like the EDSS, where 60% between 4 and 10, it's only about one symptom, like gait. From the methodological point of view, it's a very bad test, and everybody knows that. But until now, all the studies, all the drug studies are mainly about the EDSS. But additional, this kind of hidden symptoms, the EDSS, it's very well only if you really want to tell it. The EDSS is not, or the other way around, cognition and depression and fatigue is not included in the EDSS. There is a kind of other symptoms you can include the cognition, but it does not have the same impact on the EDSS compared to gait again. And so if you have a patient with an EDSS of 4 because of his impaired gait ability, it doesn't matter if this patient has a depression or not. It's still an EDSS of 4. That's why we are using, and a lot of German neurologists are using both or all of them. We are using the EDSS and the FSMC for fatigue and the BDI for depression and this SDMT for cognition. So in our reports, once a year, all 4 values are written down for the GP.
That sounds fantastic. And just a question from me, do you also monitor it for patients who aren't on medication? Do you see
Yes.
all patients? Yeah.
Yeah, of course, because, well, in my opinion, patients without a treatment are patients at risk. So well, we have a lot of more drugs, approved drugs available in Germany compared to New Zealand, as you know. But especially patients at the beginning of the disease are very well sometimes not easy to be treated because they have their doubts. Because, well, in my opinion, it's understandable, because if you have a very first relapse, let's say you have sensory loss, and the relapse, the symptoms are getting better, so you have, on your personal view, no clinical impairment, and you have the new diagnosis of MS, and the neurologist says, well, you have to be treated, and a lot of questions I'm hearing from this kind of patients are, but I don't have anything. I have a disease, but, well, I have no pain, I have no sensory loss, I'm totally fine. So why it's needed that I've been treated? So and I'm telling to them, yeah, because it's a high risk of a relapse, and we know, but there are quite a lot of patients that are, well, not willing to be treated at the beginning. It's sad, and I'm really talking about it quite a lot to them. But if they are deciding not to do any kind of treatment, at the end, it's okay for me. But they have to be monitored, and they have to be really good monitored, because, well, to be honest, most of them will have their relapse in the next months, maybe years. It sounds a little bit, well, it sounds a little bit silly, but there are a few patients who need their relapses just to understand the disease. If you are a patient after the first really severe relapse, you're not talking about not taking drugs. You're talking about taking drugs. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. We just have one final really quick question, because we do need to let everyone get on with their evening.
Okay.
Have you heard of the Wim Hof method of breathing and treatment for MS?
No.
No.
What is it?
The Wim Hof method.
No, what is it?
No, I'm not too sure, but we can look into it.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much, Matthias.
I will Google it. Okay.
I also want to thank Neil and Jan for taking the time tonight to present on the 2 projects, the IDI study and also the societal cost report. Thanks to Dr. Richard Milne and to Natalia Boven for their hours and days of dedicated work to bring those pieces of work to life. We're very grateful for your time and input into those. If you do have any further questions, you are welcome to contact us, info@msnz.org.nz. We will have recorded this, and we will send a copy out to everyone who has emailed and provided their email and registration, and it will also be available on our website afterwards also. So thank you very much to all of our speakers, and good evening.